They ravaged the eastern countries with lamentable destruction, spreading fire and slaughter wherever they went. The men are inhuman and of the nature of beasts, rather to be called monsters than men, thirsting after and drinking blood, and tearing and devouring the flesh of dogs and human beings. This is how the Mongols were pictured during their conquest across Eurasia, and it's still how they're perceived today. But what if I told you this image was more nuanced than you think? What if I told you that behind the violence, medieval Mongols were also tolerant leaders and patrons of knowledge and trade? Let's dive into the fascinating forgotten history of the Mongols and find out what's hiding behind this barbaric reputation. The year is 1240. In England, Matthew Paris, a chronicler monk, is recording the oldest mention of the Mongol in Western Europe. He described them as an immense horde of that detestable race of Satan and like demon loosened from Tartarus. Before him, the Muslim historian Ibn al-Athir had already captured the psychological horror of the invasion. He tells the story of a Mongol warrior who takes a prisoner but had no weapon at hand. So he does this. He orders the man to lay his head on the ground and not move. The prisoner obeys. The warrior walks away, retrieves his sword, and returns to finish the job. The prisoner complied without resistance. These medieval records perfectly reflect how we still perceive Mongols' invasion today. A diabolical horde of archers on horseback, slaughtering millions on their way. And as terrifying as these descriptions are, they are not entirely wrong. Every invasion by a foreign power is brutal, and the Mongols were no exception. Their ruthless reputation is, in part, deserved. But there is a problem. Medieval literature systematically exaggerated this ultra-violence and savagery, and did so on purpose. Mongols were neither Christian nor Muslim, which made them ideologically convenient monsters. For the authors of Europe and the Middle East, Mongols were infidels. And what better explanation for their unstoppable advance than the hand of Satan himself? But here's the thing. Authors like Matthew Paris or Ibn al-Athir had never seen a Mongol in their lives. They never witnessed a single attack. Their testimonies rest entirely on second-hand, biased hearsay of varying and often doubtful credibility. And Genghis Khan, knowingly or not, benefited from every word of it. Terror is a weapon. The rumors, circulating through the highly literate Muslim world, were a strategic asset. If a city already believed it was facing supernatural destroyers, it might surrender before the first arrow flew. And that matters because Mongol warriors were not unlimited. Genghis Khan was deeply invested in keeping them alive. Massacres, when they did occur, and some were enormous, were more strategic than systematic. The goal was to crush the spirit of neighboring cities, not to kill for the sake of killing. The same logic explains the feigned retreat, a tactic heavily criticized by Muslim and Christian commanders as cowardly. It was simply practical. Win by any means, don't die with honor. The Mongols had no use for this chivalric code. Now, about those numbers. In 1221, Genghis Khan sacked Nashipur out of personal vendetta. The city was razed, its people were massacred. A Persian chronicles then claimed the death toll reached 1,747,000 people in a city of around 300,000 inhabitants. The historian Jujani went even further, writing that Mongols massacred 2,400,000 people in the Afghan city of Herat. At that time, Herat's population did not exceed 150,000. In just 5 years, chronicles collectively claimed that the Mongols killed 15 million people. Run the arithmetics. This would mean that every single Mongol warrior personally killed around 350 individuals. These are not historical figures, they're ideological ones. High-scale massacres did happen, but their frequencies and scale bear little relation to what medieval sources report. And here is perhaps the most surprising detail of all. Mongol tradition actively discouraged spilling blood outside of battle, not out of compassion, out of something closer to spiritual taboo. Now compare this to the world they were conquering. The circus game of Rome, the bonfires of the Renaissance, the elaborate public torture that ran across medieval Europe, the Islamic world, India and China alike. By the standard of the so-called civilized world, the Mongols were remarkably restrained. Violence for them belonged on the battlefield, not on the stage. Symbolic violence did exist, of course. The execution of local elites, the enslavement of conquered population. But theatrical cruelty for its own sake, that was not the Mongol way. So, a disturbing question emerges. How did barbarian steppe nomads build the largest contiguous empire in human history? Short answer, because of a social revolution made by one man. Genghis Khan united the steppe tribes not by simply conquering them, but by dismantling the very forces that kept them fragmented. His reforms were personal. He was born poor, the son of an abducted woman, raised in a world defined by clan feud and slavery. He understood, from the inside, exactly what tore the steppe society apart, so he outlawed it. The kidnapping of women, a root cause of generational feuds, was forbidden. Slavery between Mongol people was also abolished. Caste aristocracies were weakened, replaced by a hierarchy of loyalty and merit. Birth no longer determined ranks, skill and faithfulness did. And this shift had unexpected consequences. It opened the doors to women in power. Queens like Sokoktani and Mandukhai would later rule part of the empire in their own names. A remarkable achievement in one of the most patriarchal eras in world history. Genghis Khan saw men and women as complementary. Men fought, women governed. Some of these queens were even Christian, complicating the image of a Mongol world that was purely shamanistic and ruled by men. Collective responsibility became the backbone of everyday life. Communities and military units alike were held accountable as a group. One person's failure brought consequences for everyone. Behavior was checked not by individual conscience, but by shared stakes. Then came equality before the law. Steppe nomad, Chinese, Uyghurs, Persians, Arabs, Caucasians, all subject to the same code. And crucially, the Khan himself was bound by that code like the lowest commoners. Finally, the move that was perhaps his most radical of all. While the Levant burned and Christendom fought the Muslim world crusade after crusade over the Holy Land, Genghis Khan decided total religious freedom across his empire. No faith was favored, all were permitted, as long as they did not threaten the stability of the state. This was not idealism, it was governance. Less resentment meant better compliance meant unity, and unity above everything else was the engine of Mongol power. Within 2 generations, the Mongol Empire stretched from Seoul to Kiev, ruling over tens of millions of subjects across thousands of distinct cultures. Around 1260, it fractured into several independent successor states. The age of conquest was over. What followed was something few people associate with the Mongols, a period of relative stability. Historians called it the Pax Mongolica, and within it, the world moved. People, goods, and ideas circulated at a speed previously unimaginable. The backbone of this movement was a vast imperial relay network called the Yuan. Merchants who carried a document called a paisa, part passport, part letter of credit, could travel the full length of the empire under legal protection and with tax exemptions. Russian soldiers served in China. Chinese porcelain arrived in Persia. The Yuan dynasty's adoption of paper money made long-distance trade faster and more flexible than ever before. Notably for horse-riding steppe people, the Yuan even experimented with maritime navigation, though they proved more successful at trade than at military expeditions, as the two failed invasions of Japan made painfully clear. China, at that time, was the greatest cultural and commercial hub in the world, and the Mongols, to their credit, were not its destroyer, they were its simplifier. They sought the best from every culture and pushed to spread it everywhere else. With no major religious or philosophical taboos at the head of state, cultural exchange flourished in ways previously unseen. The houses of healing brought together Chinese pharmacology and Muslim surgery under one roof. Mathematical knowledge from the Middle East, the zero, algebra, made its way into Chinese scholarship. The printing industry, already existing but modest, was dramatically expanded. While monks in Europe painstakingly copied books by hand, Yuan China flooded Eurasia with texts. Knowledge spread at unprecedented scale and speed, books became cheaper, literacy grew. The Yuan reportedly established 20,000 schools open to rich and poor, boys and girls alike. The drive for standardization even produced a new universal alphabet designed to write every language in the empire. And the Yuan justice system? It drastically reduced capital offenses compared to both Europe and the previous Song dynasty. Also, torture was strictly limited. These were not the choices of savages. It could not last. Around 1330, Central Asia became the epicenter of what would become a global catastrophe, the Black Death. The plague moved effortlessly along the Silk Roads, carried by fleas and rats, traveling the very trade routes the Pax Mongolica had expanded and maintained. The empire had, unknowingly, engineered the very condition for its own unraveling. The Mongol elite was not spared. The Yuan dynasty grew increasingly repressive and unjust in its final years. Instability spread, a new Chinese dynasty rose, claimed the mandate of heaven, and dismantled most of what the Yuan had built. Elsewhere, Mongol successor states converted, overwhelmingly to Islam, and gradually dissolved into the culture they had once conquered. Then came Tamerlane. Claiming descent from Genghis Khan, the 14th century conqueror swept across Central Asia, leaving pyramids of human heads in his wake. Unlike his purported ancestors, his cruelty required no exaggeration. It was real, deliberate, and systematic. And yet, because he claimed Mongol heritage, his crimes were folded into the Mongol legacy, distorting it permanently. The final blow came in the 18th century. French Enlightenment philosophers, Montesquieu, Voltaire, seized on the image of Genghis Khan as a rhetorical weapon. They painted him as the archetypal Asiatic despot, a backward tyrant who destroyed what he could not understand while ravishing civilized women. They were not writing history, they were writing political argument, using Mongol savagery as a mirror to critique French absolutism and champion democracy. It worked and it calcified everything: the tolerance, the meritocracy, the trade networks, the hospitals, the schools. None of it fits the narrative they needed, so it was quietly set aside, and the image of the barbaric horde became, in many ways, permanent. But the irony is this: the Enlightenment the French philosophers so proudly championed shared more with the Mongol Empire they despised than they would ever admit it. Thank you for watching this video about Mongol history. More untold pages of history are on the way, so if you do not want to miss any, please consider subscribing, leaving a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. These, as you know, help tremendously. This is Forgotten Fragment. Until next time, for the next story.